My name is Cassandra Miles, and I walked into my brother's wedding alone. Not because I didn't have anyone to bring. I could have invited someone, an investor, a colleague, even my ex if I'd wanted company over comfort. But I didn't. I came alone on purpose. Because today wasn't about pretending I belonged in their version of perfection. It was about facing what I'd always known, that no matter how much I built or how far I climbed, I would never quite fit into the story my family liked to tell. The wedding was held at an oceanfront estate in Charleston, South Carolina, the kind of place where the grass looks suspiciously manicured even in the middle of July, and the air smells like old money and imported orchids. I arrived early, parked my rental car at the far end of the lot, and took a breath before stepping out. As I walked across the cobblestone courtyard toward the main entrance, I could already feel that shift in atmosphere when someone who doesn't belong dares to show up anyway. The valet glanced at my sleek black suit dress like it didn't match the theme. A pair of guests walking in ahead of me turned, took me in, and smiled politely in that brittle southern kind of way that's more insult than greeting. Inside, the ballroom gleamed with gold accents, string lights, and carefully placed floral arrangements that probably cost more than a down payment on a condo. Everything was curated, flawless, designed for Instagram stories and society columns. I could practically hear my mother's voice echoing in my ear. "Try to wear something soft, Cassandra. You always look so corporate." Well, I am corporate. The moment I stepped inside, heads turned not in admiration, but in quiet curiosity. People whispered, noticed, judged. I didn't flinch. I'd walked into boardrooms where billion-dollar decisions were made with less eye contact. I could handle a few raised eyebrows. But then I saw them Lily's family. My soon-to-be sister-in-law came from a legacy line of Southern aristocracy oil money land schools named after uncles. They stood in clusters, sipping champagne, like it was sport, with faces that had never needed to know struggle. I caught one of the aunts looking me up and down before turning to her friend and saying, "Is that the sister? The one who never settled down?" The other woman sighed, tilting her head. Poor thing. Always too busy with her companies to find a man. I kept walking. I'd built my first logistics platform out of a one-bedroom apartment with peeling paint and no central air. I pitched to investors while eating microwave noodles and debugging code at 2 in the morning. My product now supports over 60% of the regional supply chains in the Midwest. But sure, let's talk about my relationship status. At the far end of the room, my brother Nathan stood near the altar laughing with Lily and her parents. He looked happy handsome in a tailored navy tux, the same boyish grin I remembered from when we were kids, when we were close, before everything. He caught my eye for a second, didn't wave, just gave me a nod. It was almost enough. Almost. I walked past the rows of smiling faces searching for my name on the seating chart. Table 14, back near the French doors, close enough to hear the music, but far enough to be forgotten. I found my seat between two distant cousins I hadn't seen since high school. One looked surprised. "No plus one?" she asked, stirring her cocktail. "I figured someone like you so accomplished wouldn't be here alone." I smiled politely. Someone like me shows up when she wants to, not when she's expected to. They laughed. I didn't. I sat down, folded my napkin into my lap, and stared out at the ocean visible through the glass. It was beautiful, wide, untouchable. Just like this family. I was just beginning to wonder how long I needed to stay before it would be considered polite to leave when something unexpected happened. From the front of the room, a chair scraped back. Slow, deliberate. I looked up. A man with silver hair and a navy suit stood. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't part of the wedding party. But I recognized him instantly. Grayson Ellis, chairman of the Ellis-Winford Group, a man who moves global infrastructure like it's chess pieces, and more importantly, Lily's godfather. He looked directly at me, and then in front of 200 guests he bowed, a full formal bow, the kind you make to someone who matters. And suddenly the room changed. For a long moment I just sat there frozen. Grayson Ellis, who once turned down an offer from Goldman Sachs because it was too short sighted, had just bowed to me in the middle of a wedding in front of my entire family. The chatter stopped. Forks paused midair. The tension in the room shifted tight as wire. But Grayson didn't acknowledge the weight he'd just dropped on the evening. He simply straightened his back, gave a short nod, and returned to his seat beside Lily's father, who looked like someone had poured vinegar in his champagne. I kept my gaze low and steady, my hand resting quietly on the edge of the linen tablecloth. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me surprised, but inside everything rippled, because for years I'd trained myself to expect silence from people who should have seen me first. I wasn't always the outsider. When Nathan and I were kids, we were close. He was 2 years younger, with a big laugh and an easy charm that followed him everywhere: soccer fields, classrooms, even the checkout line at the grocery store. People loved him instantly. My mother called him her golden boy. Me, I was the one who took apart our toaster to see how the timer worked. I was 10 when I built a sensor to water the garden only when the soil hit a certain dryness level. My dad told me to stop messing with the hose. Just go play with your brother, he said. Let the grown-ups handle this. At 12, I hacked my school's cafeteria menu system to send weekly allergy warnings. The principal threatened suspension. My mother grounded me for showing off. The thing is, I never did it to impress. I did it because I saw problems and wanted to fix them. The world made more sense when I could take it apart and put it back together. But that kind of thinking didn't belong in the Miles household. Not when there were debutante galas to attend, and etiquette lessons, and summer cookouts where girls were praised for wearing matching dresses and smiling at the right moment. I hated those cookouts. My hair never curled the right way. My mouth always said too much or too little. I was always something too quiet, too serious, too intense. Meanwhile, Nathan made everything look easy. He could trip over a sprinkler and somehow turn it into a crowd-pleasing joke. Our aunts loved him. The neighbors gave him extra slices of pie. My grandmother once said right in front of me, "Nathan will marry well. Cassandra." Maybe she'll invent something, I suppose. They weren't trying to be cruel. They just didn't know what to do with me. So I learned to stay in the background, to keep my head down and get to work. At 16, I was admitted to MIT. No party, no cake, just a "that's impressive sweetheart" and a reminder to RSVP to Cousin Beth's wedding. At 19, my app for supply chain disruption won 3 major grants. My dad told me not to get cocky. At 22, I got my first Series A funding. My mother asked if I had time to finally start dating again. Meanwhile, Nathan dropped out of college after sophomore year, started working with a real estate buddy in Atlanta, and met Lily at a fundraiser for a local tennis academy. He proposed 6 months later. The wedding was planned before the ink dried on the engagement announcement, and I was flying to Berlin to speak at an automation summit when I got the invitation. 2 weeks before the wedding, I got a call from my mom. "You are coming right," she said, skipping the pleasantries. "Nathan really wants everyone there. And try not to wear anything too dark, okay? You know how pictures turn out." I smiled bitterly. "I'll keep my war paint subtle." She laughed like she didn't hear the edge in my voice. "You're so funny. Just be there, Cassandra. And please don't talk about your work too much. It intimidates people." That was always her favorite line. As if success needed to be dimmed like a lamp in a room full of insecure furniture. Still, I booked my flight. Not for her, not for Nathan. For me, because there was still some part of me, some small, stubborn girl with scraped knees and a fire in her gut that wanted to show up, stand tall, and be seen. Now sitting at the wedding, surrounded by people who didn't know me beyond a vague text, something I realized I had stopped needing their validation a long time ago. What I wanted now was something different. Clarity. That moment when you realize the silence from your family isn't your fault, It's just their limitation. I glanced toward the front again. Nathan looked happy, radiant in the glow of love and attention. Lily sparkled under the chandeliers. Her family smiled with tightly practiced elegance. None of them looked at me, except for Grayson Ellis. He sat there, arms folded, looking thoughtful, like he'd just confirmed a theory he'd long suspected. I looked away quickly, pretending to be focused on the flower arrangements. But I knew that something had shifted. Not in the room, not in them, in me. And there's no going back from that. The ceremony was in every sense of the word staged. It started right on time, of course it did. The Miles Ellison wedding ran on a schedule tighter than most IPO launches. Guests were seated in curated rows, tallest in the back, most photogenic in the front, and people like me, neatly placed near exits or columns or potted plants. The violin quartet played the usual airbrushed classics. The altar had been decorated with imported white roses and suspended crystal teardrops that sparkled with every flicker of the chandelier. Nathan and Lily stood beneath a floral arch that looked like it belonged in a luxury bridal catalog. She was radiant in a couture gown with tiny pearl embroidery hair twisted into a glossy bun, diamond studs glowing like quiet declarations of wealth. Nathan looked proud, polished, like the older brother of a man you'd see on a credit card commercial. As I watched them exchange vows, I couldn't help but wonder if he remembered how he used to tell me bedtime stories when we were kids, how we'd hide under a blanket fort and pretend the hallway outside our bedrooms was the ocean and we were captains of our own ship. But the boy I once shared cereal with on Saturday mornings was gone. In his place stood a man who hadn't asked me a single question about my life in over 4 years. Still, I smiled. I clapped when the officiant pronounced them husband and wife. I stood politely during the recessional. I even accepted the glass of champagne a server offered me during cocktail hour. But I didn't drink it. Instead, I drifted to the edge of the ballroom where the wall opened into a sprawling garden. I wasn't hiding. I just needed to breathe. It's strange how weddings which are supposed to be about love can feel like battlefields of subtle judgment. Every conversation was coded, every glance calculated. I heard snippets as I passed tables. Her company's something with logistics. I think she lives in Austin, still single, I heard. Oh, I saw her name in some magazine last year. Forbes Fortune. Can't remember which, they said it like I was a curiosity. Not family, not even fully human. Just a profile in a publication someone skimmed between golf rounds. And then came the moment that would have broken me once, but now only made me quieter. Lily's Aunt Vivian, I think, caught sight of me near the dessert bar and leaned over to another woman in a lavender silk dress. That's her, right? The one who chose spreadsheets over a husband. The other woman gave a tight smile. Pretty face. But that kind of woman always ends up with cats and regrets. I didn't flinch. I didn't need to. Because I had heard worse at tech conferences and board meetings on funding calls where men twice my age had told me to slow down and smile more when I was presenting million-dollar rollouts. But hearing it from family, even tangentially related cocktail-clutching family, still had a sting to it. I returned to my table just in time for the dinner service. Course after course arrived like clockwork, chilled lobster tail truffle risotto, some kind of edible flower I didn't bother to identify. The waitstaff moved like dancers, perfectly choreographed, never making eye contact. I ate mechanically, offering small nods to my seatmates, 2 second cousins who spent the better part of the meal discussing their toddler's gluten allergies, and a third cousin who asked me, "So, do you like fly private now or something?" I didn't answer. My parents were seated at table 3, close enough to see, but not close enough to touch. My mother wore deep navy flattering expensive and had accessorized with a brooch I recognized from her special occasions only drawer. Her smile looked painted on. My father's suit was slightly too tight around the shoulders, and he kept fidgeting with the napkin in his lap. Neither had come over to speak to me. I didn't expect them to. I glanced toward the front. Grayson Ellis was seated beside Lily's parents, his posture relaxed but somehow commanding. He was speaking to a man I didn't recognize, but his eyes flicked toward me once, brief measured, like a reminder. You're not invisible, not to everyone. I reached for my water glass only to freeze mid-movement. Lily was walking toward me. Her smile was brittle like the sugar flowers on the cake, pretty delicate but hollow underneath. "Hey," she said when she reached my side. "I just wanted to check in. Make sure you're okay." I blinked. "Why wouldn't I be?" She hesitated. "You just seem distant?" I stared at her for a beat too long, then said flatly, "We haven't had a real conversation in 5 years, Lily." Her laugh came too quickly. "I know, I'm sorry. Things have been, busy." I nodded. "Of course." "Well," she said, shifting on her heels, "you're here now. That counts, right?" I didn't answer, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I didn't trust myself not to say everything. She left before I could respond anyway, probably relieved not to hear what she suspected. When I sat down again, I caught a new wave of whispers from the next table over. This time it was Logan Grayson's nephew, I think, and another young man in a bow tie. "She's beautiful," one said, "but cold. You can tell she married her career." The other chuckled. "Probably expects us to applaud her for showing up alone." My hand curled slightly under the table. I could have walked out. I could have grabbed my coat, disappeared into the Charleston night, left them with their champagne and curated lighting and Instagram-ready lives. But I didn't. Because right then I realized something. They weren't laughing at me. They were afraid. Afraid of the one woman in the room they couldn't quite place. The one who didn't need them. I didn't move. I sat with my hands folded neatly in my lap, my back straight, my chin lifted, not in defiance, not in pride, but in quiet refusal. Refusal to let their smallness shrink me. Then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of a chair being pushed back. Deliberate, slow, purposeful. The entire table held, half the ballroom turned to look. Grayson Ellis was rising to his feet. He didn't rush. He didn't glance around to see who noticed. He simply stood, adjusted his cuff, and took a step forward. And then another. His path curved around the main table past Logan, past Lily, past my parents who had frozen mid-toast. Glasses stilled. Conversations stopped. Even the waitstaff paused like they'd been cued by some invisible director. And then, in front of nearly 200 guests, Grayson Ellis turned to face me and bowed. Not a nod, not a stiff-shouldered dip of the head, a full, clean, deliberate bow. Formal, respectful, unmistakable. A gesture reserved for diplomats, mentors, or royalty. The kind of gesture that says, "I see you. I honor what you've built." Gasps swept through the room like wind. One woman near the front dropped her fork. Another clutched her pearls literally. A few camera phones rose, trying to capture the moment discreetly. I didn't move. I couldn't. Something inside me locked into place, an internal click, like a safe being opened for the first time in years. Grayson straightened, stepped closer, and extended a hand. "Miss Miles." He said, his voice calm but clear, resonant enough for the first 4 rows to hear without strain. "It's a privilege to finally meet you. Your keynote at the Zurich Summit changed how my firm handles adaptive modeling across 3 sectors. I owe you a thank you." You could have heard a champagne bubble pop. I blinked once, slowly. Then I stood, smoothed the front of my dress, and took his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Ellis," I replied. "It's mutual." The warmth in his grip wasn't performative. It was steady, certain. The way people shake hands when they've already decided you're not a footnote. They've decided you're the headline. I felt every gaze in the room shift, people recalibrating, reweighing. The sister who came alone, the cold one, the one who married her career. Suddenly, I wasn't the one they pitied. I was the one they missed the memo on. Grayson didn't return to his seat right away. Instead, he turned to the waiter nearest us. "A club soda," he said, then looked back at me. "If you don't mind, I'd like a word." I nodded. Without another glance at the audience, we walked past the stunned expressions, past the frozen smiles, past my mother's hands clamped around her napkin, and my father's furrowed brow. Out through the French doors, into the darkening garden. The air was cooler out there. Honest. the kind of quiet that felt real after all the hollow chatter inside. Grayson took a breath, then turned to me. "I meant what I said in there," he began. "Your Zurich model changed everything. Winchester Group was prepared to invest nearly $200 million in a firm out of Munich. But your case study made us pivot in less than 48 hours. I raised a brow. That wasn't public. It wasn't supposed to be, he said. But I make it my business to know who's actually reshaping the infrastructure of the world. And your name, it's been underlined on my desk for over a year. I was quiet for a beat, studying him. He wasn't trying to flatter me. That much I knew. Grayson Ellis didn't operate on praise. He operated on data. And when he paid attention to someone, it meant something. "You recognized me the moment I walked in, didn't you?" I said. He smiled faintly. "Yes, but I also recognized something else." "What's that?" "That you don't need this room to clap for you." That's why I stood. I looked out over the garden, the wind teasing at my hair. Most of them don't even know what I do. Or care. That's their limitation, he said. Not yours. I hesitated. "Did you tell Lily no?" "She wouldn't understand. Logan certainly doesn't." He chuckled then. Not cruelly, more like a man observing a flaw in the system he didn't design. "Logan's a nice enough kid," he added. "But he inherited his seat. He never earned it. He never built anything." His gaze met mine. "You did." There it was again. The thing I'd gone years without hearing. Not applause, not admiration, just simple acknowledgement. He saw me. He didn't grow up with me. He didn't get briefed by my mother before a brunch about what topics were too heady. He didn't learn about my work through whispers or contextless LinkedIn posts. He watched what I built. He respected the shape of it. "I know people in there are wondering why I bowed," he said. "They'll be talking about it for weeks." "Good," I replied. "Let them." He smiled again, then studied me for a long moment. "I'm launching something new," he said. "A joint initiative, public infrastructure, adaptive AI integration, green logistics. We're looking for not just builders, but rebuilders. People who know how to work with nothing and still create something scalable." I raised a brow. "And you want me." "I want your insight," he corrected. "Your name on the founding charter. Your voice in the design meetings. Not as a token, as an architect." I didn't answer right away. Not out of pride. Out of reflection. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't hungry for recognition. I had already earned it. I wasn't seeking a seat at the table. I had built my own. He didn't press me. He simply handed me a card. "Call me Monday." Then he walked off into the night, no dramatic exit, no parting line, just quiet certainty. I stood there alone for a while longer, the murmur of the reception drifting out from the French doors behind me. It was strange, really. After all these years of fighting to be heard, the most powerful moment wasn't when Grayson stood up. It was when I realized I didn't need him to. But it was nice all the same. I stood on the stone terrace for a few minutes after Grayson left. Inside, the music had shifted again. Jazz this time, smooth and safe. Glasses clinked. Laughter rose and fell in curated waves. It was as if nothing had happened, as if the most powerful man in the room hadn't just dismantled their entire social hierarchy with a single bow. But I knew better. When I stepped back inside, the atmosphere had changed. Not dramatically, not loudly, but enough. People glanced up when I passed, not with condescension, but curiosity. The kind that came from realizing you had underestimated someone and didn't know how to recover from it gracefully. Even the staff subtly adjusted. The bartender no longer reached for the cheap Prosecco when I approached. He straightened, nodded, and asked club soda. "Or would you prefer something cleaner?" "Sparkling water's fine," I said. "Lime." He nodded and handed me the glass without a word. As I turned to return to my table, a few people actually stood. Not all the way. Just the half stand that says, "Should I know you better than I do?" For once I let them wonder. My seat was exactly as I'd left it between the cousins who now seemed slightly embarrassed by their earlier assumptions. One offered a tight-lipped smile. The other whispered something about having seen my name on a panel once. I said nothing. I didn't need to. Then came the moment I had anticipated and dreaded. My brother. Nathan approached from the front of the room, drink in hand. Tie loosened just enough to suggest he was trying to play both roles, the polished groom and the laid-back brother. He smiled, a little too wide. Well, he said that was something. I raised an eyebrow. Which part you and Grace in? That whole thing. That whole thing, I repeated. He laughed awkwardly. You know what I mean? I didn't know you two knew each other. We don't. Not personally. Professionally, yes. He looked confused. He said something about a summit Zurich, I said. I gave a keynote on cross-sector tech integration and decentralized infrastructure management. Nathan blinked slowly. Right. Of course he didn't know what that meant. He cleared his throat. Well, it really caught people off guard. Just, try not to steal the show. It's Lily's day. There it was, the invisible leash. Even now, after everything, after being publicly acknowledged by a man like Grayson Ellis, I was still being reminded to shrink. I didn't ask for attention, Nathan, I said calmly. He gave it freely. Nathan hesitated. You just always make people feel like they're not doing enough. I tilted my head. Or maybe you just feel that way around someone who didn't wait for permission to succeed. His mouth opened, closed. Then he gave a soft laugh, masking the sting, and said, You're impossible sometimes. No, I said. I'm just no longer interested in performing for a room that never asked what I actually do. He didn't respond, just tapped the edge of my glass and said, Enjoy the rest of the night. Then he was gone. I barely had time to exhale when I saw her, Lily, making her way across the room in measured steps, bouquet in hand, smile frozen in place like it had been stenciled on. She reached me just as the dessert platters arrived, miniature tarts and gold-dusted mousse on silver trays. Hey, she said, her voice too bright. What was that about? I looked up at her. What was what with Grayson? That speech, that... Boo. You couldn't let me have one day? And there it was, the core of the resentment. Not confusion, not even disapproval, jealousy. You've had every day, I said, voice low and steady. This entire wedding, the planning, the performances, the curated photos, you've had the spotlight. All I did was walk in. You didn't have to be so visible. I laughed quietly. I wore black, sat in the back, didn't make a toast, didn't take the mic. I even skipped the bouquet toss. She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. I didn't steal anything from you, Lily. What Grayson said had nothing to do with you. It wasn't about family or being a bride or social status. It was about work, about results, about impact. Her eyes shifted. Do you even know what I do? I asked. I know you're successful, she said, like it was a bad word. I stood, pushing my chair back gently. No, I said. You don't know where I live, what project I'm working on, who my partners are. You never asked, and that's fine. You're not required to care, but don't act surprised when someone else does. She looked at me, then really looked, and for the first time all night I saw something crack in her. You always made me feel like I wasn't enough, she whispered. And I blinked, because I had spent years feeling like I was too much, too driven, too ambitious, too difficult. And there we were on opposite ends of a spectrum neither of us asked to be placed on. That's funny, I said softly, because your family always made me feel like I should apologize for being myself. She didn't say anything else, just turned away, bouquet trembling slightly in her hands as she walked back toward the polished perfection of her new life. The rest of the night passed like fog. There were speeches, toasts, more camera flashes. Logan's father said something about raising a glass to all family, even those who prefer the boardroom to the ballroom. A few chuckles followed, but not from Grayson. He stood again, lifted his own glass, and said, "It takes very little talent to inherit wealth, even less to marry into it. But the woman seated behind me tonight, Miss Cassandra Miles, has done neither. She has created value where none existed. She has built companies, moved markets, and earned the kind of respect that isn't granted by birth or beauty." He paused. "If we're raising glasses tonight, mine is to her." This time no one laughed. They listened. And I didn't smile, because I didn't need to. The silence that followed Grayson's toast was unlike anything I'd ever experienced at a family event. It wasn't the awkward quiet that comes after someone says something inappropriate. No, this silence had weight. It had shape. It filled every corner of the ballroom like fog after a summer storm. Even the servers froze, unsure whether to continue pouring champagne or simply disappear into the shadows. My parents didn't move. I saw my mother blink twice, as if trying to process the scene, her daughter being honored not for beauty or marriage, but for intellect, grit, and impact. My father just stared at his wine glass, as if something in the crystal might help him understand what had just happened. At my table, the cousins who'd once whispered about me marrying her career now stared in stunned silence, unsure whether to congratulate me or pretend they hadn't said what they'd said. I didn't look at them. I kept my eyes down, one hand resting lightly on the stem of my water glass, the other motionless in my lap. My posture calm, my breathing steady, but inside something shifted. Not rage, not pride. Something deeper. Clarity. Because in that moment I understood something I had never been brave enough to say out loud. They only respected me when someone else told them to. Not when I built my company. Not when I spoke at global conferences. Not when I raised seed capital without a single family contact. But now that Grayson Ellis had said my name, they were listening. That didn't make me angry. It made me free. As the final toast concluded, the jazz band returned to its rehearsed playlist. People murmured softly, their voices too low to mask the shift in energy. A few guests made their way over to me, awkwardly polite. A woman from Lily's side, possibly one of the aunts who'd mocked me earlier, leaned over and said, "I had no idea you were involved in all that innovation work. That's impressive." I nodded, offering a diplomatic smile. "Thank you." She opened her mouth to say more, but I turned back to my drink. Not rudely, just clearly. I wasn't interested in late applause. As I sat there watching the evening wind on like a wind-up toy out of sync, I saw a familiar figure making her way through the crowd, my mother. She approached slowly like someone crossing uncertain ice. Her heels clicked too softly, her hands clasped in front of her like she wasn't sure whether to reach out or keep them still. "You look beautiful tonight," she said, voice softer than I remembered. "Thank you," I replied evenly. She lingered beside me, then finally pulled out the empty chair next to mine and sat. "We didn't know," she whispered. I didn't respond. We didn't know about Zurich, or the investments, or Mr. Ellis. She paused, then added, "He spoke like you changed something real, something big." I turned to look at her fully. Her eyes were glossy but dry. Her mouth was trying to curve into a smile that didn't quite land. I asked, "Are you proud now because someone powerful said I matter, or because you finally believe I do?" She blinked. "I'm proud of you, Cassandra." That wasn't the question. A long pause followed. Then she reached out, touched my hand gently, as if trying to bridge a chasm that had been carved not by one wound, but 1,000 paper cuts over decades. "I didn't understand you when you were younger," she said. "You were always thinking so big, so fast. I was afraid you'd be disappointed when the world didn't catch up." "But it did," I said softly. She nodded. "It did." I let her hold my hand for a second longer than I wanted to. Then I let go. Because some silences don't need to be filled, and not every moment of connection has to be kept. I turned back to the table and stood deciding that I'd been generous enough with my time. As I walked toward the far end of the ballroom, weaving between guests and champagne flutes, I heard my name again, this time from my father. Cassandra, he called, rising slightly from his chair. I stopped, turned halfway. He looked unsure of himself, a rare sight. His suit jacket had wrinkled, his tie was slightly crooked. I saw that article, he said awkwardly. The one about your company moving into Europe. I meant to say something. You didn't, I replied. He nodded slowly, like he knew the words couldn't land where they were meant to anymore. I'm glad you're here, he said finally. I didn't come for you, I answered. I wasn't being cruel. I was just done lying. Outside, the sky had deepened into indigo. Stars peeked out above the ocean, flickering gently above the surf. I stepped out onto the terrace again, exhaling into the night. A moment later, I heard footsteps behind me. Lighter this time. Vanessa. She stopped just behind me. I didn't turn. I didn't know he knew you, she said. Grayson. I had no idea. I let the silence linger between us. You never asked, I replied. She was quiet for a moment. You always made me feel like I wasn't enough. I turned then, just enough to meet her eyes. And you always made me feel like I was too much. That was the last thing we said to each other that night. She didn't argue, didn't offer an apology. She just stood there in her flawless dress with her perfect hair and looked at me like she finally saw something unfamiliar in her older sister power that couldn't be softened by family expectations. When I left, I didn't say goodbye. I didn't need to. I walked alone through the stone corridor that led from the ballroom to the guest valet. Behind me, the music thumped with false cheer. Glasses clinked. Toasts resumed. The carefully planned chaos of the reception was back on track, as if nothing had happened except something had. Something subtle but irreversible. And I wasn't the only one who felt it. A couple of guests passed me on their way out, faces I half recognized from LinkedIn headshots or startup mixers in Austin. One man, mid-30s, wearing a navy blazer too tight at the shoulders, stopped short when he saw me near the garden steps. I didn't realize you were that Cassandra Miles, he said, tone part admiration, part apology. I smiled faintly. You still don't. He chuckled awkwardly, fumbled a goodbye, and caught up with his wife. I watched them go. I wasn't angry, just done explaining. The night air was cooler, now sharper. The smell of salt water rode in from the coast, and above me, the stars were finally unobscured by the ballroom chandeliers. I stood at the edge of the terrace and took a breath, the first real one I'd had in hours. That's when I heard it, the slow, unhurried approach of footsteps behind me. Grayson. He joined me without speaking, hands tucked in the pockets of his dark overcoat, his tie slightly loosened the way men do only when they're among equals. For a few minutes, we stood in silence. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest, rare. Then he said quietly, I wasn't trying to make a scene. I turned to look at him. I know. You look like someone who wasn't going to ask for acknowledgement, he added. So I decided to offer correction instead. I smiled. Some illusions deserve to be broken. He exhaled through his nose, a quiet sound of agreement. Then he turned, leaning on the stone railing beside me. I meant what I said earlier, he continued, about the initiative. We've been spinning our wheels trying to integrate scalable infrastructure logistics into the public-private sector. But what you're doing with decentralized systems, it's ahead of where we are. And I don't want to play catch-up. I narrowed my eyes slightly. So this isn't just admiration? No, he said. It's strategy. But also respect. He pulled a slim folder from his inside jacket pocket and placed it on the railing between us. I want your mind on this. Not just your name, I didn't pick it up. Not yet. I've been offered partnerships before, I said. Usually they want the headline, not the work. And what do you want? That was the question, wasn't it? For so long, what I wanted was simple, or so I thought. Recognition from the people who should have known me best, a seat at the table, a moment where I didn't have to shrink myself to fit into the space they allowed me. But tonight had shifted something, not because I'd been seen, but because I'd stopped needing to be. I want to build things that last, I said at last. But I'm not going to explain myself anymore while I do it. Grayson nodded. Good, then we're aligned. I finally reached for the folder, opened it. Inside were the preliminary documents, a charter proposed budgets, and a list of partners that made my eyebrows raise. You're serious about this? I said. I don't put my name on things I can't defend in a room full of billionaires. And you want mine next to it. Exactly. There was a time when I would have hesitated, when I would have thought, will this make my family proud? Will they finally understand? Will they talk about me the way they talk about Nathan? But not tonight. Tonight, I wasn't negotiating for love or respect. I was making choices. And I was choosing me. I looked up at Grayson. Let's talk Monday. He smiled simple and sharp. We will. Then he straightened, nodded once, and walked off into the shadows. Quiet assured the way only men like him can exit, when they've already made their point. I stayed outside for a while longer, watching the lights from the ballroom flicker through the glass windows, listening to the faint echoes of clinking silverware and choreographed laughter. Somewhere inside, Lily was probably cutting her cake. Vanessa was posing for more photos. My mother was likely trying to remember a quote from the article she skimmed about my company last year, but none of it reached me. Because for the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel like the outsider. I felt like the one who left the stage before the show turned tacky. I didn't return to say goodbye, didn't wait for anyone to notice I'd slipped out. I simply walked to my car folder in hand heels, clicking softly on the stone path. I turned on the engine, rolled the window halfway down, no music, just the hum of the sea and the ache of the kind of silence that doesn't hurt anymore. And as I drove back down the winding road leading away from that estate, I realized the truth I hadn't been able to say out loud until now. I never needed them to clap. I just needed to stop asking. The next morning, the world was quiet. Not dramatically so, just the kind of silence that settles after something breaks or shifts or ends. I woke in my hotel room before sunrise. Charleston's coast was still cloaked in the deep blue of early morning. The sheer curtains shifted slightly in the breeze from the cracked window. My phone buzzed once, then again. I didn't check it. I wasn't in a rush to see who had suddenly remembered my number. Instead, I sat at the small desk near the window folder still in hand and reread Grayson's proposal. The numbers were solid, the projections ambitious but grounded. It wasn't a vanity partnership. It was real, urgent, tangible. And he hadn't offered it to flatter me. He offered it because he knew I didn't need it to prove anything. That's what made it powerful. That's what made me consider saying yes, not for recognition, but for contribution. I set the folder aside and took a deep breath. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote a letter to myself. Nothing elaborate, just a few lines on the hotel's embossed stationery. You were never difficult. You were just ahead. You were never too much. They were too little. You don't need to be smaller to be loved. You just need to stay whole. I folded it neatly, slipped it into my suitcase between my laptop and my blazer. A reminder for some future day when the weight returned. Around 9 a.m., I finally checked my phone. 17 unread messages, 4 missed calls, 2 voicemails, the usual suspects. My mother. Just wanted to say again how lovely you looked last night. Your father and I, we're so proud of you. Sorry if we didn't say it better. Nathan. Hey, about last night. I think we should talk. I wasn't fair. Vanessa. Just a thumbs-up reaction to Grayson's speech. No words. And Lily, surprisingly. Can we meet for coffee before you leave? Just the two of us. I didn't reply to any of them right away. Not because I was angry, because I was choosing my peace. Because when you've spent most of your life trying to earn the attention of people who look through you, the sudden beam of their interest doesn't feel warm, it feels fluorescent, temporary, artificial. I ordered room service, ate breakfast alone, black coffee, scrambled eggs, and a single slice of toast. No distractions, no performance. By late morning, I packed my things and checked out. At the front desk, the clerk handed me a sealed envelope. "There's a note for you," she said, "from Mr. Ellis. He dropped it off personally." I opened it in the car. "Cassandra, let them keep their curated fairy tales. You're building something real. I'm glad we met. Monday noon, my office. Let's begin." "Grayson." I folded the note slowly, put it in the same pocket where I'd kept rejection letters a decade earlier, where I used to store every small scrap of dismissal and doubt like ammunition. Now, it was just history. Itifinagam. At the airport, I stood in line at security like everyone else. No VIP treatment, no whispers, no stares. And that oddly felt good, because power isn't always in being recognized. Sometimes it's in knowing exactly who you are when no one else is watching. By the time I boarded, I still hadn't returned any messages. I would, eventually, but not because I owed anyone, because I might choose to. There's a difference. I took my seat by the window, placed my bag beneath the seat in front of me, and pulled out my tablet. Not to check emails, not to prep for Monday, just to write. I opened a blank document and titled it simply, "The Architecture of Enough," because that's what this was. Not a story about revenge, not even one about recognition, but about freedom. The kind that arrives not with applause or headlines, but with quiet, undeniable certainty that you're no longer asking to be seen, because you've finally seen yourself. 3 days after the wedding, I walked into the downtown Austin office of my company. Same glass doors, same concrete floors, same slightly too cold air from the vent that always buzzed near the conference room. But something felt different. Not about the office. About me. I wasn't walking in with my head high to prove anything. I wasn't adjusting my blazer in the reflection of the elevator doors bracing for battle. I wasn't rehearsing my accomplishments in case someone challenged why I was here. I was here because I belonged, because I built this, and because I no longer needed anyone else to tell me that was enough. I spent the morning reviewing a few proposals, then closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. The skyline stretched out beyond the window-clean lines and sharp glass reflecting the summer sun. Across the street, people rushed to meetings, hustled to appointments, typed furiously on phones while jaywalking through crosswalks. The version of me from 10 years ago would have admired them, maybe even envied their pace. But now I wasn't chasing anymore. I was choosing. That was the difference. My phone lit up. A new message. "Grayson Ellis, Boardroom 7A. Noon. Ready when you are." I stood slowly. No nerves, no second guessing. I grabbed my notes, walked out of my office, and took the elevator down to where the new partnership was being formed, Winchester Group X Miles Solutions. Not as a merger, not as an acquisition, as a collaboration. The conference room was bright, clean, minimalist. Grayson was already seated, sleeves rolled, sipping black tea, like the day hadn't already reshaped the tech landscape. "Cassandra," he greeted. "You're on time." "I always am," I replied. He smiled. "Let's begin."
The meeting was smooth, strategic, respectful. He asked for my input, waited when I spoke, pushed when needed but never talked over me. Afterward, as we walked out side by side, he said something that I carried with me long after the meeting ended. "You know," he began, "I've worked with a lot of visionaries who demanded to be seen. Very few who were content simply building what mattered." I paused at the elevator. "Sometimes it's not about being seen," I said. "It's about making sure the structure you're building doesn't require validation to stand." He nodded, thoughtful. "And yours doesn't." "No," I agreed. "It never did. I just didn't realize it until now." Yeah.
Like that night back at home, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my balcony as the Texas sky faded from orange to navy. No celebration, no calls to brag, just quiet. In my lap was the original printout of the Zurich Summit keynote, my slides, my case, studies, my closing thesis. The same talk Grayson had referenced, the one no one in my family had ever watched, the one that shifted 3 international investment paths and was translated into 6 languages. And still, my mother had once asked, so is it like an app or something I used to keep that moment like a bruise? Now, it was just a data point, a reminder that not everyone will understand the blueprint you follow, and that's okay. You don't need the whole room to understand. You just need to stop handing them the ruler. The next morning, I wrote my own kind of vow. Not the kind that's recited in white gowns under chandeliers. The kind you write alone before anyone claps. I will not shrink to make others comfortable. I will not explain what was never theirs to understand. I will not wait for applause that was never mine to chase. I will lead. I will build. I will live wide and without apology. I will not be the version of me that makes others feel safe. I will be the version of me that is true. I folded it, taped it inside the back cover of my journal, right beside the first napkin sketch of my first company from 12 years ago, because that's the blueprint I choose to keep, the one that doesn't need to be clapped for to be real.